Well, of course, that interstate empire has got slightly bigger over the last 60 years. To pay tribute to his grandfather's achievement and to celebrate the life of Dame Elizabeth, please welcome Lachlan Murdoch.
Thank you very much, Michael. I should first just start by thanking everyone for their very kind condolences and well wishes for both Dame Elizabeth and for the whole family. And I know I speak on behalf of my whole family in thanking everyone for their, their very warm wishes. I should say, I mentioned this to Professor Blaney in the men's room earlier, and he asked if I could say this. Also mention this to you all, and I told him I would. I'm regretting that now, but I did read this speech to Dame Elizabeth yesterday morning, and I think she appreciated it. Sorry, but it's a difficult night for my family. My father was honored to be invited to speak to you about his father, and I'm equally honored to take his place to speak to you about my grandfather, a man who I feel I know intimately, but whom I never met. I wish I had met Keith Murdoch, but he died long before I was born. He died on October 4th, 1952. He was just 66 years old. My grandfather was a journalist. That was all he wanted to be from the time when he was a very young boy. That was despite the fact that my grandfather was painfully shy and had a serious and often debilitating stammer, so serious that when he went to the railway station to buy a ticket, he had to give the man who sold the tickets a handwritten note. Keith Murdoch's father, the very Scottish and the very Reverend Patrick Murdoch, wanted Keith to go to university, but the 19-year-old had three qualities that would stick with him through his life: determination, persistence, and great perseverance. So despite his father pushing him to follow a different path, and after putting in a lot of hard work, he got a job at the Age. Another Scotsman, David Syme, who we've also honored here tonight and who saved the Age from bankruptcy, was so impressed by the young Keith Murdoch shorthand that he offered him a casual job as the Melbourne district correspondent at the grand freelancer's rate of a penny, halfpenny a line. For 4 years, Keith worked day and night reporting everything that moved in Melbourne, lifting the local circulation and saving every penny he earned until he had saved enough money to sail steerage class to England. Now, at a halfpenny or penny, halfpenny a line, that's a lot of column centimeters. But he went to England for two reasons. One was to advance his career as a journalist, and second was to find a way to cure his stammer. Now, if you saw the movie, The King's Speech, you will know about Australia's Lionel Logue, the speech therapist who cured the future King George VI of his stammer. Perhaps due to his stammer, Sir Keith spent 3 years unsuccessfully trying to find work as a journalist on Fleet Street, where he felt he could truly learn his trade. He failed to find a steady shift, but after 3 years of speech therapy with Lionel Logue, his stammer had improved dramatically. Determination, persistence, and perseverance. My father credits Lionel Logue for saving my grandfather's dream of a life in journalism, but I credit Sir Keith and the strength of the young man's character. Elocution improved. He came back to Melbourne and became the parliamentary reporter for The Age. A few years later, he helped found the Australian Journalists Association. After the First World War broke out, my grandfather was on his way to London when the government commissioned him to go to Gallipoli on the pretext of investigating complaints from the troops about the Australian Imperial Forces mail service. The truth was the Australian government wanted to find out from a reporter that they knew and trusted what was really happening on the Gallipoli Peninsula. Appalled by what he and other war correspondents saw, Keith Murdoch broke the censorship contract he and other journalists had to sign. And on the boat back to London, he typed his famous Gallipoli letter to Prime Minister Andrew Fisher, praising the Australian soldiers and condemning the British command. As a result, when the ship docked in France, my grandfather had to hand himself in to a British officer, and the Gallipoli campaign was destined to soon be over. Back home in 1921, he took over editorial control of the Herald. The Herald was a small town newspaper with a circulation going nowhere. Within a year, he had breathed a fresh life into it. The Herald was easier to read, news was crisply presented, and the photographs and graphics were bigger and better. He began hiring the best journalists and contributors to join what was soon called the House. Keith Murdoch liked talking and listening to his journalists, and they in turn became part of a family. He would be remembered as an exacting employer and a good friend. He wrote daily notes to the staff. Here's one that I especially like. The paper today is good throughout, but never let anyone call our city Melbourne in our columns. It is deliberately provocative, which is good, but provokes no thought or argument, but sneers at our paper. Journalism and newspapers were subjects of pride to him. Above all considerations, in the newspaper structure, he wrote, devotion to readers' interests must be paramount, and so long as this is in the hands of well-trained, public-spirited newspapermen, failure need not be feared. He was uncompromising and correct in his belief that the media should be free of regulation. It is in the public interest that news media not be fettered, not be controlled by any elite, be they social, political, or economic. As Sir Keith wrote, it must always be our readers' interests, our listeners' interests, our viewers' interests that are paramount. After the purchase of the Sun News Pictorial in 1925, my grandfather was leading a team of 1,000 from the company's newly built headquarters in Flinders Street. By the late 20s, he had expanded interstate, and of course, around the same time, he began his everlasting romance with Elizabeth Green. He saw a photograph in the Herald magazine and arranged to meet her. They married 2 years later. Keith Arthur Murdoch attended his last annual meeting of the Herald and Weekly Times in December 1951. Looking back over his 30 years as publisher, he could see his two Melbourne newspapers alone now had a combined daily circulation of over 800,000 copies. And that was in a city with barely a quarter of today's population. He was a patriot who believed in Australia, and for 30 of his 66 years, my grandfather was a builder, a maker of newspapers, and of newspapermen. He would turn a modest company producing one daily newspaper and a weekly agricultural journal into an Australia-wide publishing company, transforming its cornerstone, the Herald itself, into one of the world's largest evening newspapers. As well as being a successful publisher, he was also a pioneer of commercial radio networks and a person who at the same time was president of Melbourne's library, museum, and gallery, and would sponsor international exhibitions in the city. But Keith Murdoch, newspaperman, still had an unfulfilled yearning. He wrote, "The old journalist dies, still stretching out for better English, better cover of actualities, better comment, better taste, more happiness in his paper's pattern. These are aspirations which we can all still strive for today, no matter by whichever means we choose to deliver the message. Stretch out. That was my grandfather's motto for success, and he did. Thank you.
And as I call Mark Baker and Ronald McDonald to the stage, I can bring you the news that the Victorian government has tonight announced there will be a state memorial service for Dame Elizabeth on Tuesday, December the 18th. So I think they'll be packed to the rafters for that one, gentlemen.
We have a small presentation